The central premise of the President's Iraq policy since 2004 has been that a reduction in violence would lead to political reconciliation between the Shia and the Sunni. In his House testimony on Monday, General Petraeus asserted that the surge has reduced violence in Baghdad, although other reports and experts dispute those conclusions. In his testimony, Ambassador Crocker admitted frustration with the uneven political progress within Iraq. I would argue that by the administration's own criteria, the surge has not worked. It has not led to political reconciliation. During my visit to Iraq, the Deputy Prime Minister, Dr. Barham Salih, told me that, quote, "We will not resolve our political differences by this September or even by next September." I found a remarkable lack of political progress by the Iraqi government despite the urgent demands of the U.S. government. In fact, the Sunni ministers have abandoned the government for the moment. But you don't have to take my word for it. In July, the President's nominee to be the next chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen, testified that there does not appear to be much political progress. That was true in July. Last month's national intelligence estimate on Iraq found that Iraq's sectarian groups remain unreconciled and that there is widespread Sunni unwillingness to accept a diminished political status. Last week, independent, nonpartisan Government Accountability Office found that the Iraqi government had met only 3 and partially met only 4 of the 18 political, security, and economic benchmarks that Congress set earlier this year. The new report on Iraqi security forces by a panel headed by former Marine Commandant General James Jones found that the national police force is so rife with corruption and infiltrated by Shia militia forces that it should be disbanded. General Jones acknowledged that the grim political situation was hampering military efforts. The seriousness of the current Iraqi political leadership is also in question. One of my colleagues, Jim Moran, was on a trip to Baghdad in August, and he was sitting with Iraq's national security advisor, and the delegation had difficulty getting this man's attention because he was distracted by a children's cartoon on a widescreen television in front of him. And when Congressman Moran asked him to turn it off, the security minister responded, "But this is my favorite television show." And he also told, when Jim Moran said, you know, "We're not going to be here forever," the Iraqi security minister leaned forward and said, "Ah, but we are your front line on the war on terror. In other words, you have to stay here indefinitely." I mean, that would seem to be the attitude. General Petraeus told Congress that he could not project whether there would be any troop reductions after next summer, and promised to report back to Congress in 6 months. But the general gave no rationale for why the administration's strategy, which has failed in the past, would somehow start working in the future. I don't think it will, because the current U.S. force is too small to control the violence throughout the whole country. Look what's happening in Basra today with Shiite militias battling each other. And second, sectarian loyalties divide the Iraqi security forces, rendering their loyalty to the government questionable at best. This is less a matter of training and much more a matter of allegiance. As one commentator said the other day, is there an Iraq and are there Iraqis? And that is an important question. The administration's strategy, I think, is really kick the can down the road and designed to hand the problem of having some 130,000 troops in Iraq to President Bush's successor. During my trip, I was also surprised to learn how little control the government of Iraq, enclosed in the green zone, has over what happens in the rest of the country. There are 2 very important dynamics going on inside Iraq, one positive and one negative. First, the reduction of the presence of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, or AQI, in the Anbar province, as General Petraeus testified, is welcome. That's why President Bush flew to Anbar and not Baghdad to claim success. AQI are jihadist fighters whose links to bin Laden are far more in spirit than in coordination. But most experts concur that the change in Anbar province began before the surge, and that when Sunni sheikhs in the province united in opposition to AQI and agreed to cooperate with American forces to drive AQI from the province. The second and more troublesome dynamic is an ongoing process of ethnic cleansing through violence between the Shia and Sunni factions. This is creating a de facto soft partition through a massive dislocation of people within Iraq, as well as refugees who have fled the country. 4 million Iraqis have been forced from their homes or have fled the country. Even Baghdad has fewer mixed neighborhoods than ever before. And to translate that into American terms, the corresponding number here would be 50 million Americans who have left the country or moved within it. Neither of these two dynamics that I mentioned are the result of actions by the Iraqi government, and the U.S. military has been a partner only in the first. The success in Anbar is not transferable to other areas. It is a partnership of convenience with former insurgents who fought American forces that is unlikely to last. And remember, the Sunni in Anbar province that are our allies are extremely hostile to the government in Iraq that we support, which is a Shia-dominated government. There is no basis, in my opinion, to conclude that the continued deployment of U.S. troops is a necessary precondition to progress in Iraq. Because of the mismanagement and poor judgment of administration policymakers and their supporters in Washington, we are no longer able to influence events within Iraq in a positive direction. At best, I think our influence operates on the margin of changes in the country. To some, it was news when General Petraeus said that U.S. troop strength in Iraq would return to its pre-surge level of about 130,000 troops by mid-July of next year. Yet, as he told me in Baghdad, these reductions really happened on their own due to troop rotations. Now we read that the President's going to make a major announcement this week that U.S. troops will fall to their pre-surge level. Forgive me if I think that is like taking credit for the sun coming up.